Believing that sleep offers sanctuary is the first and most fatal mistake you will make tonight. You seek rest, an escape from the gnawing anxieties of the day, but you are merely turning a key in a lock you do not understand. You are closing your eyes to one world only to open them to another, a world that has been waiting for you in the silence. I have seen the shadows that dance behind your eyelids, the cold ashes of forgotten fears that stir when your guard is down. They are not dreams. They are whispers from a place where cracked mirrors show not your reflection, but the thing that stands behind you patiently. Tonight, we do not seek sleep. We pull back the veil. We listen to the creaking door of consciousness and peer into the darkness from which true stories are born. The first tale is not a story told, but a frequency I once intercepted, a stain of sound bleeding through the fabric of reality. It concerns an old bakelite radio, the kind with a single milky eye that glows like a dying ember. A young man, an archivist of forgotten sounds, found it in a dusty shop, its cord frayed like a hangman's noose. He took it home, not for music, but for the static, the white noise he called the sound of the universe's sleep. He did not know that some sleep is a fever dream, and some static is not empty. It is the sound of 1,000 voices screaming at once, their cries ground into dust by the gears of time. He was looking for peace in the hiss, but what he found was an echo. He would leave the radio on as he slept, a humming companion in his lonely apartment. But one night, a voice, a single, clear voice sliced through the static. It was a weather report, spoken in the clipped, unhurried cadence of a bygone era. The sky over Blackwood Creek is a bruised purple, the voice declared. Expect a cleansing rain by morning. The archivist, intrigued, searched for any record of a town called Blackwood Creek. He found nothing. No maps, no census data, no forgotten histories. It was a phantom, a name spoken only by the ghost in his machine. The next night, the radio crackled again, broadcasting the town's high school basketball scores. Blackwood Creek was losing badly. He felt a chill, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the draft from his window. He began to document the transmissions. He heard advertisements for a general store that sold brands that never existed. He listened to the town gossip, the sermons of a preacher who spoke of a god of shadow and bone, the faint sound of children's laughter that always sounded strained. He was mapping a ghost town, an entire community, living out its mundane existence within the coils and tubes of his radio. But the broadcasts began to change. The preacher's sermons grew more frantic, speaking of a harvest, of a tithe that must be paid. The laughter of the children vanished entirely, replaced by the sound of a lone, creaking swing set. The whispers from this beyond were becoming more argent. The tone was no longer nostalgic. It was a warning. The archivist became obsessed, his own world fading into a gray backdrop for the vibrant, terrifying life of Blackwood Creek. His sleep was filled with visions of clapboard houses and picket fences, all painted in shades of charcoal and ash. He could almost smell the rain the announcer had promised, a scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sweet, like dried blood. One night, a new sound came through the speaker. It wasn't a voice, it was a siren. It was a long, mournful wail that seemed to stretch on for an eternity, a sound that promised not rescue, but judgment. He felt the cold terror of the townspeople as if it were his own, a shared current of dread flowing through the airwaves and into his very soul. Then, the final broadcast from Blackwood Creek arrived. It was not the preacher, not the announcer, not even the siren. It was a chorus of whispers, a legion of voices speaking as one. They spoke of a door that had been opened, of a mirror that had been cracked, of a hunger that had finally been sated. And then they spoke his name. They whispered his full name, his address, and thanked him for listening. forgiving them in anger. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The radio fell silent, not to static, to a profound, deafening quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath, a predator waiting to strike. He never turned the radio on again. He sold it, but sometimes, when the house is quiet, he can still hear it, a faint whisper in the hum of the refrigerator, a phantom weather report in the rushing of the pipes. Blackwood Creek is gone, but the frequency is everywhere. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Does a particular sound, a forgotten song, or a whisper of static hold a strange power over you? Leave your testimony in the ashes below. The shadows read every word, and they remember those who listen. Every soul that joins this congregation feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your presence here gives strength to the telling, so the next tale may be brought forth from the abyss. We now turn our gaze from a town that vanished from the airwaves to a home where a reflection refused to be bound by the laws of physics or sanity. A home where a mirror became not a window, but a cage. Our second vision concerns a young woman named Elise, a babysitter for hire, who believed the greatest monster she could face was a defiant child with a penchant for tantrums. She had not yet learned that some children are not merely children. They are keys. They are conduits for things that wait on the other side of the glass. She was hired to watch a little boy named Samuel in an old Victorian house, the kind with floors that groaned like a dying man and windows that rattled with the whispers of the wind. The parents were a pale, nervous couple who gave her only one rule: do not cover the mirror in Samuel's room. He dislikes the dark. A strange request, but Elise, eager for the paycheck, simply nodded. The worst mistake you can make is to accept a rule without questioning the reason for its existence. Samuel was a quiet boy. He played with his wooden blocks on the floor, his back always to the enormous, ornate mirror that dominated his bedroom wall. It was an antique, its glass warped and clouded with age, like a cataract-filmed eye. Elise sat in a rocking chair reading a book, the rhythmic creak a comforting metronome in the cavernous house. But a flicker of movement in the mirror's periphery caught her eye. She glanced up. Samuel was still on the floor, stacking his blocks. But in the mirror, in the reflection, the boy was standing, his back to her, facing the dim, reflected room. She blinked, her heart a frantic crow beating against her ribs. When she looked again, the reflection was back on the floor, perfectly mimicking the real Samuel. A trick of the light, she told herself. A distortion in the ancient glass. But the truth is, the darkness does not play tricks. It sets traps. An hour later, Samuel got up and went to the window, pressing his small hands against the cold pane to watch the rain begin to fall. Elise watched him, a fond smile on her lips. Then her eyes drifted to the mirror. Her smile froze, cracking like thin ice. The reflection of Samuel was not at the window. It was standing in the center of the room, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, its reflected eyes fixed squarely on her. There was no mistaking it this time. The boy in the mirror was sentient. It was aware, and it was not Samuel. A cold sweat, like the touch of a phantom hand, beaded on her neck. She wanted to scream, to snatch the real Samuel and run, but her limbs were locked in ice. The thing in the mirror began to smile. It was not a child's smile. It was a jagged, predatory grin that stretched the reflection's face into a horrifying mask. The real Samuel remained at the window, oblivious, humming a nursery rhyme that now sounded like a funeral dirge. The reflection took a slow, deliberate step towards her, its movements fluid and impossibly silent. It was closing the distance in its world of glass and silver, and Elise felt a primal, gut-wrenching certainty that if it reached the edge of the mirror's frame, it would not be stopped by the glass. It would simply step through. She was a fly caught in a spider's web, and the spider was a distorted, grinning copy of the innocent child in her care. This is where everything changes for you. When you realize the monster isn't under the bed, it's wearing the face of someone you're meant to protect. With a surge of adrenaline, Elise broke her paralysis. She lunged forward, grabbing the real Samuel by the arm. The boy cried out in surprise, but she didn't stop. She dragged him out of the room, slamming the heavy oak door behind them. As the latch clicked shut, she heard a sound from within the bedroom. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. A sound like small, insistent knuckles rapping against glass from the inside. She fled the house, dragging the bewildered child with her into the cleansing rain, not stopping until the pale, worried faces of his parents appeared in the driveway. She never told them the full story. How could she? How do you tell someone that their son shares his room with a duplicate, a predator that wears his face and waits with infinite patience behind the looking glass? She quit babysitting after that. She can't stand to look at her own reflection for too long anymore. She's always afraid she'll see herself smile back. Now, imagine this. The terror is not a stranger, not a ghost or a frequency. Imagine it is in your blood, a legacy passed down through generations, an inheritance of shadow. The next story is one such tale, a whisper of a man who inherited a house, but the house came with a debt of memory, a debt that had to be paid to the thing that dwelled in the cold ashes of the hearth. This is the story of the inheritance of hunger, where a man's most cherished moments were not his own to keep, but were instead currency for the void that had claimed his family line for centuries. He thought he was claiming his birthright. He was in fact only taking his place at the table as the next meal. Arthur received the lawyer's letter after the passing of his estranged great-uncle. He had inherited Blackwood Manor, a sprawling, Gothic estate swallowed by ivy and fog on the moors. He remembered the place from a single, terrifying childhood visit, a house of perpetual twilight, filled with portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow him down the creaking corridors. He arrived to find the manor exactly as he recalled, a monument to decay. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust, and something else, something faintly ozonic, like the air after a lightning strike. The lawyer had mentioned a peculiar condition in the will. Arthur had to spend 30 consecutive nights in the manor to claim it. A test of nerve, he thought. A final, eccentric joke from a man he barely knew. He didn't understand it wasn't a test, it was an acclamation. The first week was uneventful, filled with the mundane tasks of exploring dusty rooms and cataloging decaying heirlooms. He felt a persistent chill, but attributed it to the ancient stone and lack of modern heating. The oddities began subtly. He would find himself in a room, unable to remember why he had entered it. He would forget small things, a shopping list, a friend's name from a phone call. He dismissed it as stress. Then he lost his first memory. It was the memory of his 8th birthday, the taste of the chocolate cake his mother had baked, the feel of the wrapping paper on his first bicycle. He knew it had happened. He had photographs, but the sensory experience, the emotional resonance was gone. It was a hole in his soul, a void where a treasured moment used to be. That night he was awakened by a sound. It was a soft, wet, lapping noise coming from the grand library downstairs. Armed with a heavy iron poker, he crept down the stairs. The library was darker than pitch, but he could sense a presence. The air was heavy, vibrating with a low hum. As his eyes adjusted, he saw it. In the center of the room, where the moonlight from the high windows pooled on the floor, was a shape. It was a being of pure shadow, a humanoid silhouette that seemed to drink the light around it. It had no features, no face, no form, but as he watched, it shuddered, and he heard a faint, contented sigh, and in that moment, he smelled it, the phantom scent of his mother's chocolate cake. It was feeding on his memory. He understood the horrifying truth. The chill he felt in the house was not physical. It was the entity's presence, leaching the warmth from his life. The 30-night rule was not a test of endurance. It was the time needed for the creature to attune itself to its new host, its new source of sustenance. His ancestors had not been owners of the manor. They had been its keepers, its larder. Each generation sacrificed their most precious memories, their joys, their loves, their triumphs, to keep the entity sated. What the stars don't tell you openly is that some curses are not writ in the heavens, but in the very blood that flows through your veins. He was trapped. To leave before the 30 days was to break the pact, to unleash the starving thing upon the world. To stay was to be hollowed out, one memory at a time, until he was nothing more than a shell of a man, wandering the halls of a house that had consumed him. He is still there now, according to the whispers I have heard. He has served his 30 days, and many more since. He is the Lord of Blackwood Manor. He has a home, a title, a fortune he cannot spend because he cannot remember what money is for. He wanders the cold, creaking halls, a blank slate, his mind a wasteland of forgotten birthdays, lost loves, and evaporated laughter. He tends to the entity, his silent, hungry master, offering it the faint echoes of a life he no longer recognizes as his own. He is a ghost long before his own death, a keeper of a house that keeps him in return, paying his rent with the currency of his soul. And the thing in the library, it waits, patiently, for the day when the last of the Blackwood bloodline is summoned to pay their inevitable tithe. The forest, a place many of you see as a refuge, a bastion of nature's purity. But you are wrong. The deep woods are an ancient kingdom, and humanity are merely trespassing fools. The trees have seen civilizations rise and fall to dust, and their roots are tangled in secrets that would shatter your fragile minds. The next tale comes from the heart of such a place, a story etched not in ink, but on a memory card, captured by the unblinking, passionless eye of a trail camera. It is a testament to the fact that we are not the apex predators of this world. We are simply the ones who have not yet met the things that truly hunt in the shadows between the trees. A seasoned hunter named Marcus, a man who believed he knew every secret of the Appalachian wilderness, ventured deeper than ever before. He was tracking a legendary buck, a creature of myth among the local hunting community. He set up a series of motion-activated trail cameras in a part of the forest the locals called the Silent Wood, a place where birds didn't sing, and the undergrowth seemed to hold its breath. He returned a week later to collect his cameras, his heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. He sat in his cabin that night, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and began to scroll through the hundreds of images of deer, raccoons, and the occasional curious bear. It was all perfectly normal, until he reached the footage from the camera at the very heart of the Silent Wood. The first few clips were empty, just the wind rustling the leaves. Then, at 3:33 a.m., the camera triggered. The infrared illuminated a clearing. Nothing was there, but the camera had triggered. A glitch, Marcus thought, and fast-forwarded. It triggered again at 3:33 a.m. the next night. Again, the clearing was empty. For 5 consecutive nights, the same thing. An empty clearing, the same timestamp. Marcus felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. On the 6th night, it appeared. It was not an animal he recognized. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that bent at angles that defied biology. Its skin was the color of bleached bone, and it had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank expanse of flesh. It moved with a disjointed, twitching grace, like a marionette whose strings were being pulled by a madman. Marcus felt the whiskey turn to ice in his gut. The creature, it seemed to be searching. It would stop, its featureless head tilting, as if listening to a sound he couldn't hear. Then, it looked directly at the camera. It froze. Marcus swore he could feel its gaze through the screen. A cold, analytical stare that stripped him bare. It knew it was being watched. The creature then did something that made Marcus drop his glass, shattering it on the wooden floor. It raised one of its long, spindly arms and pointed, not at the camera, but through the camera. It was pointing directly at him, sitting in his cabin miles away. A slow, terrible understanding dawned on him. The camera hadn't been glitching the previous nights. The creature had been there. It had just been too fast for the shutter speed. It had been circling the camera, studying it, learning from it. The final video clip is only 3 seconds long. It shows the creature rushing towards the camera, its blank face filling the entire frame. The last image is a blur of bone-white skin before the feed cuts to black. Marcus deleted the footage. He smashed the memory card with a hammer and buried the pieces in his yard. He never went back into the silent wood. He sold his guns, boarded up his cabin, and moved to the city, trading the silence of the forest for the noise of the metropolis. But he found no peace. He says he sees it sometimes, in the corner of his eye. A tall, pale figure in the crowd, a twitching shape in a dark alleyway. He knows it wasn't the camera it was pointing at. It was pointing at the one who was watching. A warning of doom. It has his scent now. It is no longer hunting deer. It is hunting him. Some horrors are not born of the wild, but of the festering heart of civilization itself. Let us now travel back in time, to a city choked by plague, where desperation was a currency, and fear was the air they breathed. In the labyrinthine alleys of this dying city lived a seamstress, a woman whose needle and thread did not mend cloth, but flesh. She offered a service born of ultimate despair, a new face, a way to escape your sickness, your past, your identity. But every stitch has a price, and the thread she used was woven from regret and pain. What her patrons did not realize was that the old faces, they did not go quietly into the darkness. They remembered, and they whispered. Her name was Mademoiselle Dubois, and her shop was hidden behind a butcher's stall, the scent of iron and decay a fitting prelude to her work. The wealthy, the diseased, the hunted, they all sought her out. She worked with skin sourced from the unclaimed dead in the plague pits, treating and tanning it with alchemical solutions known only to her. Her craft was macabre, but perfect. She could stitch a new face over a client's old one so seamlessly that not even their own mother would know the difference. They would walk out of her shop reborn, a stranger in their own skin, leaving their former life behind like a shed cocoon. They believed they were buying freedom. In reality, they were buying a haunted mask. The process was agonizing. The client would be strapped to a chair as Mademoiselle Dubois worked with her silver needles and silken thread, her movements precise and unnervingly calm. The worst part was not the pain, but the sound, the faint, wet tearing as the new skin was stitched to the old. But the true horror began weeks later. A client, now living as a merchant in a new city, would be closing his accounts for the night when he would hear it. A faint whisper, seeming to come from inside his own head. It would speak a name he had long since abandoned. It was the voice of his old life, the voice of the face beneath the face, crying out from its fleshy prison. The old identity, buried but not dead, was fighting for release. The whispers would grow stronger, more insistent. The merchant would start to see glimpses of his old reflection in puddles and polished silver. At night, he would dream he was clawing at his own cheeks, trying to rip the suffocating mask away. His new life, once a symbol of escape, became a torment. The seamstress had not just given him a new face, she had given him a permanent cellmate, a ghost bound to his own flesh. Some of her clients went mad, their minds shattering from the constant internal dialogue, the war between the man he was and the man he pretended to be. They were often found in locked rooms, their fingernails broken and bloody, their new faces torn to shreds, revealing the pale, rotting flesh of the original beneath. A broken cross on the door meant another of Dubois' creations had met its end. And what of the seamstress herself? Mademoiselle Dubois simply continued her work, her face a placid, unreadable canvas. No one ever knew her story, or why she possessed such a grotesque skill. Some said she wore a mask of her own, the first and most perfect one she ever created. A face stitched together from the most beautiful features of her long-dead clients, a patchwork of stolen identities. They say if you listened closely, when her shop was silent and the city slept its feverish sleep, you could hear them. The faintest chorus of whispers, emanating not from a single throat, but from her own placid, perfect face. The hushed, overlapping voices of all the people she had buried alive, under layers of skin and thread. A walking, breathing graveyard. Do you understand now? The mask you wear for the world. Is it truly your own face? Or is it a construct, stitched together from the expectations and lies you tell yourself? Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Confess your truth in the comments. The shadows gather to witness every confession, and if you have not already, join our circle. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness, ensuring these stories are never lost to the silent graves of time. From a city of masks, we travel to the edge of the world, to a lonely pillar of stone and light, where a keeper kept watch, not against the dangers of the sea, but against a danger that rose from it. His journal is all that remains. The sixth story is not a narrative I weave, but a testimony I unearthed. It is the final log of Thomas Pike, a lighthouse keeper stationed on the remote and treacherous isle known as the Widow's Tooth. Lighthouses are beacons, symbols of hope and safety, but Thomas learned that some lights are not meant to guide you home. Some lights are lures. They call out to things in the abyssal deep, things ancient and hungry, things that have slept for eons in the crushing dark, waiting for a signal to rise. His logbook, its pages warped and stained by seawater, does not speak of storms or shipwrecks. It speaks of a light that came from below the waves, a light that answered his own. Log entry, October 12th. The fog is thicker than I've ever seen it, a shroud of gray wool, silencing the world. The lamp is doing its duty, cutting its slow, golden swath through the murk. But tonight, I saw something new. As my beam swept the waves, a light shone back. Not a ship. This was from beneath the surface. A soft, phosphorescent blue, pulsing in rhythm with my own lamp. A call and response. The sea is playing games with me. The loneliness of this place must be gnawing at the edges of my reason. I will sleep and see if the phantom light returns with the tide. But the phantoms of the sea do not recede with the tide. They are the tide. Log entry, October 14th. It is back, brighter this time. The blue light is no longer a faint pulse. It is a steady, hypnotic glow that illuminates the churning water from below. It is directly beneath the lighthouse now. The gulls have vanished. The usual cacophony of their cries has been replaced by a silence so profound it feels like a weight on my chest. I went outside onto the gallery. The air is cold, but the stone of the tower, it hums. There is a vibration running through the rock, a low-frequency thrum that resonates deep in my bones. It is coming from the source of the light. It is calling. I feel a pull, a strange, compelling urge to go down to the shore. Log entry, October 17th. I haven't slept. The light never fades, and the humming is constant. It's in my teeth, in my skull, but the most terrifying change is the water itself. The sea around the base of the Widow's Tooth. It's no longer water. It has become thick, viscous, and perfectly clear, like glass. I can see straight down. I saw shapes, all vast, geometric, impossible shapes moving in the depths. They are not swimming. They are rearranging themselves, building something. The light emanates from the center of their construction. What the stars don't tell you openly is that the great architects of this universe do not dwell in the heavens. They dwell in the crushing dark. Log entry, October 19th. The door will not hold. The sound is no longer a hum. It is a grinding, scraping noise against the foundation of the tower. They are coming up. The light from below is now so bright it pierces through the floorboards, bathing my small room in an alien blue twilight. I can hear them now, not a voice but a chorus of thoughts pressing in on my mind. They are not hostile. They are curious. They say they have been sleeping. They say my light, my little lamp, woke them. They think it is a star, fallen from the sky. They are coming to retrieve it. They are coming to take their star home. The last thing I see is the beautiful, terrible blue light pouring under the door. It is the color of heaven. It is the color of the deep. Thomas Pike's log ends there. The book was found by a fishing vessel, tangled in a net miles from the widow's tooth. The lighthouse itself was gone, not ruined, not crumbled into the sea, vanished, as if it had been plucked from the rock, leaving nothing but a scarred and empty foundation, a testament to a light that answered a call from a god older than the sea itself. A home should be a sanctuary, a fortress against the darkness of the world. But sometimes, the walls we build to keep the world out only serve to trap the darkness inside. The next tale is a whisper from the heart of suburbia, a place of manicured lawns and forced smiles, where a young couple discovered that the most terrifying ghosts are not those of the dead, but those of what could have been. It is the story of an empty swing set, a nightly ritual, and a grief so powerful it tore a hole in reality and let something else crawl through, something that wanted to play. Mark and Sarah bought their dream home, a 2-story house with a big backyard, perfect for the family they hoped to start. The only odd feature was the old, slightly rusted swing set that stood under a weeping willow in the far corner of the yard. They planned to tear it down, but life got in the way. One night, Mark awoke to a faint, rhythmic sound. Creak, squeak, creak, squeak. He looked at the clock. 3:33 a.m. He went to the window that overlooked the backyard. In the pale moonlight, he saw it. One of the swings was moving, arcing back and forth, as if pushed by an invisible hand. He felt a chill crawl up his spine, the primitive fear of the unseen. He woke Sarah, but by the time she looked, the swing was perfectly still. This became their new, horrifying routine. Every night, at precisely 3:33 a.m., the creaking would begin. They tried everything. They took the swing down, but the next night, the empty chains swayed violently, clanking against the metal frame. They wrapped the chains around the top bar, but awoke to find them unwound, swinging freely once more. A friend, a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator, came with his equipment. He recorded EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. In the static, they heard a faint, childish giggle. Mark and Sarah, though terrified, felt a strange pang of pity. A child's ghost, lost and lonely, wanting only to play. They began to leave toys by the swing set, a silent offering to the restless spirit. They were trying to comfort a ghost, not understanding they were actually feeding a parasite. The activity escalated. The giggling became clearer, seeming to come from just outside their bedroom window. Toys they left outside would appear inside the house, placed in a circle on the living room floor. One night, Sarah awoke to find a single, muddy child's footprint on the carpet next to her side of the bed. This was no longer a sad, lonely ghost. This was an intruder. This was a violation. Desperate, they hired a local historian to research the property. They braced themselves for a tragic story of a child who had died in the house, but the historian found nothing. No deaths, no tragedies. No children had ever even lived on the property before them. The land had been empty farmland for centuries. The ghost was not a ghost of the past. The truth, when it came, was far more devastating. The historian, digging deeper, found something else. A news article about the previous owners, the couple who had built the house and installed the swing set. They had been expecting a child, a little girl. They had decorated the nursery, bought the toys, and put up the swing in joyous anticipation. But there had been complications. The baby was stillborn. The grief-stricken couple sold the house immediately, unable to bear the constant silent reminders of the life they had lost. Mark and Sarah finally understood. The presence in their yard wasn't the ghost of a child who had lived. It was the echo of a child who had not. An absence so profound, a desire so strong, it had created a vortex, a hole in the world, and through that hole, something else had noticed the invitation. Something that had taken the shape of a child because that was the shape of the grief it was feeding on. It wasn't a ghost, it was a tulpa of sorrow, a creature made of loss and longing, and it now considered their house its home. From the manufactured grief of a suburban yard, we descend into the dust and silence of an attic. Attics are the mind's forgotten corners, places where memories and relics are left to decay. But sometimes, what you find in the attic is not something you forgot. It is something that has been waiting for you. This next whisper is about a family who discovered such a thing. A silent porcelain sentinel that was more than just a relic. It was an anchor, a placeholder, and the thing it was holding a place for was getting impatient. This is the tale of the mannequin in the attic, a story that proves that the most terrifying objects are those that look almost, but not quite, human. The Harris family moved into a sprawling old house at a ridiculously low price. The realtor had been vague about why. Previous owners left in a hurry was all he'd said. The family, David, Claire, and their daughter Sophie, loved the space and character. On their first day, while exploring, David pulled down the folding stairs to the attic. The air that billowed down was stale and cold, smelling of mothballs and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like dead flowers. In the center of the attic, under a single bare bulb, stood a mannequin. It was female, dressed in a faded Edwardian gown, its porcelain face perfect, except for a single thin crack running from its hairline to its painted left eye. Its vacant glass eyes seemed to stare directly at the attic entrance. Claire was immediately unsettled. "Get rid of it," she said, her voice tight. "It's creepy." David, ever the pragmatist, agreed. The next day, he and a friend hauled the heavy mannequin down the rickety stairs and left it on the curb for trash pickup. That night, Sophie woke them with a scream. They rushed to her room to find her sitting bolt upright in bed, pointing a trembling finger towards her closet. "The lady," she whispered. "The crack-faced lady was watching me." David checked the closet. It was empty. He calmed his daughter, blaming it on a nightmare brought on by the stress of the move. He didn't sleep well the rest of the night. The image of his terrified daughter burned into his mind. The next morning, as David was leaving for work, he glanced towards the attic stairs in the hallway ceiling. They were pulled down, slightly, just an inch, as if someone had opened them and then tried to close them quietly, but hadn't quite managed it. His blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, what he would find up there. He climbed the stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. There it was, standing in the exact same spot, bathed in the dim light. The mannequin, its head was tilted slightly, and the crack over its eyes seemed wider, darker. There were no footprints in the thick dust, except for his own from the day before. It was impossible. They tried everything. They chopped it into pieces and buried it in the woods. 3 days later, it was back in the attic, fully assembled, the axe marks gone, but the crack on its face now a jagged spider web. They burned it in a bonfire in their backyard, watching as the paint blistered and the porcelain blackened. The next morning, it stood in the attic, pristine except for the crack, which now wept a thin, black, viscous fluid. The sweet, cloying smell of decay now permeated the entire house. The mannequin was not an object. It was a vessel, a placeholder for a presence that was tied to the house. As long as the mannequin stood in the attic, the presence was contained within it, dormant, watching through its glass eyes. But by trying to remove it, they were weakening the vessel, breaking the seal. The crack was a visual representation of the barrier thinning between their world and whatever was inside. They were not getting rid of a haunted object. They were trying to evict the house's true owner. The final straw came when Claire was home alone. She heard a faint, scraping sound from upstairs. Then, the slow, heavy tread of footsteps crossing the attic floor directly above her head. Then the creak of the attic stairs being lowered. She froze in the kitchen, a knife in her hand, her breath hitched in her throat. She watched in abject terror as 2 pristine white porcelain feet descended from the opening in the ceiling, followed by the hem of a faded Edwardian dress. It was coming down. The thing inside had finally worn the vessel down enough to move it. Claire fled the house and never returned. The family abandoned everything. The house is still there for sale again at an impossibly low price. Realtors don't mention the permanent resident in the attic. They don't mention the crack-faced lady who waits patiently for the next family to try and make her move. Now, imagine yourself adrift, not in a haunted house, but in a haunted journey. A journey with no destination, on a conveyance that answers to no schedule but its own. The 9th circle of this dark collection is a tale of transit, of a man who fell asleep on a train and woke up in a nightmare. It reminds us that the mundane rituals of our lives, the daily commutes we take for granted, are but thin veneers over a far stranger and more terrifying reality. This is the story of the last train from nowhere, a ride from which there is no return ticket, for it takes you to a place that is not on any map. Leo was an accountant, a man whose life was a predictable series of numbers and timetables. Every night, he took the 11:42 p.m. train home from the city. One Friday, exhausted after a brutal week, he boarded the last car and promptly fell asleep. He awoke with a jolt, not to the familiar announcement of his stop, but to an unnerving silence. The car was empty. The lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. He looked out the window. Instead of the familiar suburban sprawl, he saw only an impenetrable, inky blackness. The train was still moving, its rhythmic clatter the only sound in the universe. Panic began to bubble in his chest. He had missed his stop. He had missed it all the stops. He walked through the train, car after empty car. He was utterly alone. He found the conductor's cabin, but it too was empty. The controls set, the train driving itself into the abyss. He returned to his seat, his mind racing. Where was he going? The train then began to slow. Outside the window, a platform materialized out of the darkness. The station was old, Victorian in design, lit by gas lamps that hissed and spat. The sign on the station read Ashendel. He had never heard of it. The doors hissed open. The platform was deserted. A cold, unnatural wind blew through the open doors, carrying the scent of wet soot and regret. He stayed put, a primal fear rooting him to his seat. The doors closed, and the train pulled away, plunging back into the void. This continued for what felt like hours. The train would stop at other phantom stations, Emberfall, Gallows Crossing, Sorrow's End. Each was more decrepit and menacing than the last. At Gallows Crossing, He saw a lone figure standing on the platform, a tall man in a tattered coat, his face obscured by shadows. The man did not board. He simply watched the train pass, his stillness more terrifying than any movement. The train was not a conveyance for the living. It was a psychopomp, a ferry for the dead, and he was a mortal who had accidentally stumbled aboard. He was a ghost in their machine, and this is where everything changes for you, when you realize you are not the one taking the journey. The journey is taking you. Then, the train began to pick up passengers. At a station called the Gloom, the doors opened and figures made of shadow and smoke drifted aboard. They took seats around him, their forms indistinct, their presence sucking the warmth from the air. They did not speak, they did not move, but he could feel their collective consciousness, a vast, ancient sadness that pressed in on him. They were the lost, the forgotten, the souls who had no destination. This train was their purgatory, an eternal, repeating journey through a landscape of their own misery. Leo was now the anomaly, the single spark of life in a carriage of cold ashes. He knew with a chilling certainty that if he stayed on this train, his spark would eventually be extinguished, and he would become one of them, a shadow doomed to ride the rails for eternity. At the next station, Penance, he made his choice. As the doors hissed open, he bolted. He ran out onto the fog-shrouded platform without a second thought, not caring where he was, only knowing he had to get off that train. He didn't look back as the doors closed and the train pulled away, its rhythmic clatter fading into the oppressive silence. He was alone, in a place called Penance, a place that didn't exist on any map made by human hands. The whispers say he is still there, wandering the endless fog, trying to pay a toll for a journey he never meant to take. He escaped the train, but he never escaped its destination. A warning, be careful where you fall asleep. You might just wake up somewhere you were never meant to be. We have arrived at our final destination for tonight. We have journeyed through haunted frequencies, mirrored rooms, and hungry manors. We have glimpsed things in the woods and lighthouses, and ridden a train to purgatory. Our last tale is one of blood and belief, a story that proves the most terrifying monsters are not born of shadow, but are created and sustained by the rituals of man. It speaks of an anthropologist who sought to understand a remote culture, only to discover that their art was not art. It was a prison, and the paint they used was the key. This is the ritual of the dried blood. Dr. Alistair Finch was a man of science, a skeptic who believed every myth and legend could be explained by psychology or sociology. He traveled to a remote, uncharted jungle to study the Uruku tribe, a people said to have no contact with the outside world. He found them living in a village carved into the side of a cliff, their central cave decorated with breathtaking murals. The paintings depicted their history, their hunts, their gods. The paint they used was a deep rust red, almost black in the torchlight. The tribe's shaman explained that it was a sacred mixture, its primary ingredient being the dried blood of their ancestors, preserved for generations. Alistair, though intrigued, saw it as symbolic. He failed to understand that for the Uruku, symbolism and reality were the same thing. Alistair spent months with the tribe, documenting their customs, learning their language. He was particularly fascinated by the murals. They seemed to possess a strange, hypnotic quality. The figures depicted in the hunt scenes looked so lifelike, their painted muscles tensed, their eyes wide with fear or ferocity. He noted that the tribe members never turned their backs on one particular mural, a massive painting that depicted not a hunt, but a monstrous spider-like deity with 100 weeping eyes. The shaman warned him it was the keeper. It was a cage for a god they had defeated eons ago, and the blood in the paint was what bound it to the stone. The ritual was not one of worship. It was one of reinforcement, one of imprisonment. One night, driven by a thirst for academic glory, Alistair did the unthinkable. He stole a small sample of the dried blood pigment, scraping it from the edge of the keeper mural. He wanted to analyze it, to break it down into its chemical components, to demystify it with science. As his knife scraped the stone, he heard a sound, a soft, wet tearing, like old canvas ripping. A new crack appeared in the mural, branching out from where he had taken his sample. A single painted eye of the spider god seemed to weep a trickle of fresh crimson paint. He fled back to his hut, his heart pounding, the stolen pigment clutched in his hand. He had not stolen paint. He had stolen a piece of the lock. That night the jungle fell silent. The incessant chorus of insects and animals died, replaced by a listening, waiting quiet. From the main cave, a new sound began. A slow, rhythmic chipping, like stone breaking against stone. Alistair crept to the entrance of the village and looked. The keeper mural was moving. The spider god was slowly, painstakingly pulling itself from the wall, its painted limbs becoming three-dimensional, shedding flakes of dried blood and rock like a hatching insect. The tribe was huddled at the far end of the cave, chanting, their faces masks of terror. They were not watching a ritual, they were watching a prison break. The god they had trapped was coming free, and it was Alistair's sacrilege that had given it the weakness it needed. The creature finally pulled itself free from the wall, a monstrosity of living stone and ancient blood, its 100 eyes weeping red tears as they blinked open for the first time in millennia. It paid no mind to the chanting tribe. Its gaze swept the village and fixed upon Alistair's hut. It could smell him. It could smell the piece of its prison that he clutched in his sweaty palm. Alistair ran. He fled into the jungle, the sound of cracking trees and splintering rock close behind him. The whispers that reached me speak of no conclusion. They do not know if he escaped, or if the keeper reclaimed the stolen piece of its soul, but they do say that sometimes explorers in that deep jungle find entire swaths of forest where the trees are painted with a familiar rust-red color, and on the bark are murals of a running man, his face a permanent mask of terror, a new prison for a new kind of god, the fool who thought science could explain away the power of dried blood. The veil thins, and our time in the shadows draws to a close, for now. You have listened to the echoes and the static, you have gazed into the predatory mirror, and you have walked the halls of hungry houses. The darkness you have witnessed tonight is not a fantasy. It is a reflection, a cracked and distorted echo of the truths that sleep just beneath the surface of your own world. The creaking door you hear in the night, the flicker of movement in your peripheral vision, the sudden baseless fear that grips you in a quiet room, do not dismiss them. They are the universe whispering its secrets to you. The question is, are you brave enough to listen? To truly listen? Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Let the shadows know you were here. Your comment is a mark left in the cold ashes, a sign that you are one of us, one who is not afraid to stare into the void. Every soul that joins this communion feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your subscription is a pledge. You're like a candle lit in the grand, silent cathedral of the unknown. We are a congregation of watchers, of listeners, of those who understand that the real world is far stranger than the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe at night. You are no longer just a viewer, you are a witness. You have heard the whispers from beyond, and that knowledge will now follow you, a shadow stitched to your own. Until the next transmission, sleep if you can. But know that when you close your eyes, you are merely opening a different door, and you are no longer sure of what waits on the other side. Farewell, for now.